Every kid, any person that ever walked a beach, I think everybody's thought about finding pirate treasure. In April of 1717, the Whydah crashed on the shores of Cape Cod. I was certain that I wanted to look for this ship. It's offering us a glimpse into this never-seen-before world of pirates. It's the only documented pirate treasure, period. But there was a story here that was much more valuable than any of the artifacts. Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. It's sort of the last place I would have ever expected to be when I was a kid growing up on the Cape, when I used to sit around the fish house with my Uncle Bill and all of my uncles who had not too long had just come back from World War II, and we would hear the stories. And our favorite story was from my Uncle Bill, and it was the story of a pirate ship that had wrecked off the Cape. Now, my other uncles referred to Uncle Bill as Uncle Bull, so so there was always a modicum of doubt, not with me. I believed everything Bill said. But my uncles, I could see them sort of winking at each other, and there was always that story of that pirate ship. And I think everybody, every kid, any person that ever walked a beach, I think everybody's thought about finding pirate treasure. I mean, I've read stories about people finding Captain Kidd's ship in Kansas. So it's But this cover of National Geographic magazine, of all the treasures in the world, it's the only documented pirate treasure, period. All of the treasures that we've heard about, in the Caribbean, it's not pirate treasure, Spanish galleons. This is real pirate treasure. This is the stuff that Robert Louis Stevenson wrote about. It's the stuff that I dreamt about. And when I started off as a kid, when it was what was I going to do with all that treasure, with all the millions of dollars that we would get when we salvaged it. But of course, when I found the ship, I realized that I couldn't sell anything. That there was a story here that was much more valuable than any of the artifacts. So I did a complete right turn after we discovered the ship, that this was something I could never sell. I've never sold an artifact. And I'm so proud to be with National Geographic, and we have 2 world-class exhibits traveling around the world, real pirates. And a lot of people really put a lot of tremendous sacrifice. It's been over 30 years for me on the Whydah, not to mention all the years dreaming. So as I heard these stories as a boy about this ship, there was a legend of this handsome young sailor that came to Cape Cod in 1715. And he met this beautiful young girl from Wellfleet. Her hair was the color of corn silk, and her eyes were as blue as the deeps of Gull Pond. These were some of the things that I remember as a kid and reading about her. And her name was Maria Hallett. And Bellamy promised he was going to go to the Caribbean to salvage the 1715 Spanish treasure fleet, all of the Spanish galleons that wrecked. And he left Maria. And he promised to come back someday with a rich dowry, and they would be married. And off he went to the Caribbean. The Whydah, which was a slave ship that was built to carry slaves back from Whydah, where 2 to 3 million slaves were exported from this part of Africa. And when the Whydah dropped off a shipment of slaves in Jamaica, it was headed back to England with money and all of the things that they were able to gather in Africa that were on the ship. And the Whydah was a 26-gun ship of about 300 tons. It was a brand new vessel. It was built in 1716. And on this first voyage, after dropping a shipment of slaves off in Jamaica, she was captured by Sam Bellamy, who gave up looking for Spanish treasure ships and went on the account, or turned pirate. And the Whydah was the 50th ship that he captured. But off of Cape Cod in April of 1717, the Whydah was caught in this horrific storm and crashed on the shores of Cape Cod off of Wellfleet. And the moon cussers showed up the next day. These are people who cursed the moon because they wanted things dark so that they could rob ships that came ashore. And you can see these fellows busy at work robbing everything that was washing away, off of the ship. I was certain that I wanted to look for this ship, but I didn't have enough documentation to, this was a Jack and the Beanstalk deal. I was really going to have to bet the farm. I had to have something that was really solid. And I came across this document, which is a map. And the map was drawn by a fellow by the name of Cyprian Southhack, who was sent by the governor of Massachusetts to salvage the Whydah after it wrecked. And this person was a well-known map maker. He was in his 50s. He was chosen by the governor of Massachusetts to salvage the shipwreck. This was a solid piece of documentation. This is a treasure map. Place where the pirate ship Whydah wrecked, Bellamy Command, where I buried 102 men drowned, pirate ship Whydah. He also kept a ship's log. Couldn't spell very well, but the things that he was saying were things that I could understand as a salver because he was in the salvage business. He said that the water was messy with sand and he couldn't see. And they had tongs to tong for things. And the storm lasted for several days and he could watch the ship on the outer sandbar. This is wrecked very close to shore, only 1,500 feet from shore. Well, less than that because all of the erosion on the Cape. This was probably less than 1,000 feet from shore at the time that it wrecked. And it was one of the worst storms of the century. And he watched it. So here's somebody who's in my business, who's a salvage person, watching this ship break up. And he said, the next day she turned bottom up and the decks fell out. The riches with the guns will be buried in the sand. The riches with the guns will be buried in the sand. That resonates every night I go to bed. I dreamt about that for 30 years. What did he mean? Well, he meant the 26 guns that were on the Whydah. He's telling me where the treasure is. And as I said, when I started this, there's no question about it, we were looking for treasure. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. It was mostly the adventure for me, I think. But we found thousands and thousands of coins and artifacts, but we still, up until very recently, hadn't found what we were looking for. Now, another document that surfaced, out of the 180 pirates that were in the Whydah pirate gang, 8 of them survived this shipwreck. And they were taken to Boston and tried. And everything they said was transcribed by a court stenographer. And one of the pirates testified. He said 50 pounds was added to every man's share. The money was kept in bags, in chests, between decks. Well, what happens when the treasure that's between deck, something has to happen to it. We're going to get that, I'll get to that in a few minutes. In the fall of 1982, John Kennedy Jr., who worked for me on the vineyard where we lived, and myself, we hired a local fisherman to take us out to the site. We did a magnetometer survey. We determined that there was an area in the survey that was hot. In other words, there was a lot of metal there. Indeed, there was 26 cannon. That would give off a big magnetic signature. In other words, this would indicate the disturbance level of how much iron would be in the Earth's magnetic field. This is an old machine, by the way, back from the 80s. But we were able to calculate the difference in the Earth's magnetic field. And that's where we felt that the Whydah wrecked. And after John dove on the wreck and came up and looked at me and said, "Barry, there's nothing but sand," we decided how we were going to go through the sand. We built 2 mailboxes, which is able to divert the energy from the propellers as the propellers spin, and the energy from that, the water stream, is diverted straight down where you can blow the sand away. And as you get close to artifact level, which is very deep, It's now we're finding 30 feet under the sand, artifacts migrate to a layer of Pleistocene glacial till. We just found out that's even deeper than we thought. We'd always been working 10 to 20 feet below sand. We now know that there's a whole other layer 30 feet below the sand. One day after blowing, we got down to a level and we found what turned out to be a cannonball. And out of the cannonball, there was a little coin, and it turned out to be 1684. And then there was this trigger guard from a musket. For me, I knew at that time that I had found the Whydah. I mean, it wasn't enough evidence to prove everything, but it was exactly where it was supposed to be. I knew it. But the state historian did not believe me. And she was smart not to. In fact, I was giving a talk one night at a church in Wellfleet before we found the wreck, and an elderly lady came up to me and held her wrist out after the talk and said, "My grandfather said he found these coins on the beach, and he said that they came from the Whydah. And they were gold escudos, little gold escudos, about 1/2 ounce each. And they had slice marks in them, like someone hit them with a knife or a file. And I'll never forget that. But it was kind of like, oh, okay, somebody else found the Whydah. It didn't really sink in, because there's always lots and lots of treasure stories. But you'll see why that's important in a few minutes here. So we went out to the site. We were bringing up bags of treasure. Here's a bag. And in the bag, there are these chunks of gold. Now, this is a Spanish bar. It would be as long as a small sandwich sub, you know? But it had those same slice marks in it that those coins had that elderly lady had on her wrist. The pirates were testing it to see if it were counterfeit. Because each one of these pieces of gold, that would have been the size of a small pizza, a disc of solid gold. But they're broken up into pieces. And all of these black objects are pieces of 8. Coins, Spanish coins, Dutch coins, French coins. You know, why are the pirates breaking up? Because they were dividing up everything equally. They were democratic. They were experimenting in democracy. Each man had an equal share. And here was proof, these gold bars that were cut into pieces. This would have been the minimum share that somebody would have got when a ship was robbed. And again, 50 pounds was added to every man's share, there being 180 men. And this is just out of a little 8-foot by 8-foot test pit. Every artifact is measured in. We bring up the artifacts. They're bagged very carefully and numbered. So every single artifact here has a position where it came from. And then they're tagged and photographed and drawn. And we have, you know, over 200,000 artifacts recorded. This is just one dive. And the problem there is that the sand is caving in. And during big, big storms, the site is being destroyed. So it's really a situation where we're trying to go as fast as we can. It's been 30 years. But, you know, to save this thing, because it's offering us a glimpse into this never-seen-before world of pirates. These guys were voting. And in fact, 1/3 of these people were of African origin. They were black. Native, they were people who were equal on board the Whydah. And some of them, Africans, were being elected by predominantly European crews as officers and even captains on board slave ships. We have absolute proof of this. And in fact, you didn't read about this. I never saw that in Disney when I was a kid with Treasure Island. I didn't see any black people. But 1/3 of the pirates in the golden age of piracy were of African origin, most of whom were former slaves. But still, the state historian didn't believe us that we had the Whydah until this happened. We found a ship's bell at the bottom of a 20-foot deep pit. And here we're bringing it up. And this is a concretion. This is a mass of material. When iron is submerged in salt water, it'll start to degrade. and an electrical field will form around a piece of iron depending how big it is. And anything within that field, whether it's human remains or shoes or coins, will be encapsulated in these concretions. I mean, they're variable treasure chests. And one day I get a call from the laboratory and said, Barry, you better get over to the lab. We just found a W on the bell. Because the whole word Whydah was on the other side of the concretion. And as the concretion was taken away, it just doesn't say Whydah. It says the Whydah Galley, 1716. 1716. And it was the cover of the New York Times the next day. And there's the bell today. And we've kept it submerged in water with the concretion still on it. The Whydah Galley, G-A-L-L-Y. And again, all sorts of things are encapsulated in concretions, including the bones, a shoe, a size 6 shoe, a very carefully made silk stocking, and a human leg bone. And for years, I would go into our laboratory, and my historian is beyond brilliant. He knows everything there is to know about pirates, and he's been with me for over 25 years. But he doesn't have a clue about normal things, like coffee stains. He'd walk right in the wall drinking his coffee. And one day I said, Ken, there's really small pirates on board the Whydah, size 6 shoe. I said, were there any kids on board the ship? He said, oh yes, there was a boy. I said, geez, Ken, it's been years. Why didn't, oh, and his name was John King. He was on a ship called the Bonita. They were leaving Jamaica. And I've got a letter somewhere to the governor of Jamaica from Captain Savage, who was the captain of the Bonita, complaining about this very rebellious young boy named John King, who threatened his mother and joined the pirate crew. Now that stocking and leg bone and shoe was found in this cannon. So apparently what happened is when the ship turned over, John King was crushed and his bone and shoe and sock concreted to the cannon. But this is it's sort of the things that we're finding. And this wasn't discovered, only years after, we discovered it. So that's why it's important in what we do and in our archaeology and that things aren't sold, is to keep the collection together so academics can squabble about what they are, including this Akan jewelry. And we have hundreds of pieces of Akan gold that were being traded along with the slaves by the European slave traders. And it's the oldest reliably dated collection of Akan jewelry in the world, I'm told. This is our laboratory on Cape Cod where we're making discoveries every day. In this lab, there are over 30,000 pounds of concretions. Look at all those bags. These are actually artifacts that have been deconcreted, but the concretions themselves, we X-ray, and we haven't X-rayed them yet, just for fragments of gold dust and all of that. And each of these tanks can contain cannon and concretions. This anchor was recently deconcreted. You can see the concretion from the anchor there. And now, here's the big twist. The Whydah didn't have 24 cannon. We found over 60. So the guns that Southhack was talking about, the riches with the guns, would be buried in the sand. I had no idea. Nobody would have had any idea that there were those extra guns. But the guns that he was referring to were the guns that were in the bottom of the ship, the guns that we just found. And concreted to this anchor was the top of a treasure chest. Here you can see a heart-shaped coin, rare heart-shaped coin with a cross on it. These are probably 2 reals, which are a small Spanish coin. You can see a sword hilt with the woven metal, and the pommel. You've heard of being pummeled. That's the pommel on the sword hilt. And these are big pieces of 8. This is probably Mexico. That's probably either Potosi or Lima, Peru. That's probably Mexico. And thousands and thousands and thousands of artifacts are still encapsulated within these concretions. Now I know these are escudos by the shape of these, and they were kept in stacks, and this is what we've been finding recently on the site. We've been finding stacks of coins, which mean they were in bags. And that's, the outside of this is the concretion, And there's very clearly a stack of coins, which I think are escudos. And the sword handle that you saw, there's my dad working on it. And as an example, every artifact that we bring out is carefully drawn and recorded. Now this would be the side plate off of a musket, serpentine, you know, a symbol of ferocity. And it's brass, but it's not only photographed, but it's carefully drawn to bring out the imperfections or, you know, whatever might be of archaeological significance. And this is the oldest reliably dated Freemason symbol. Freemasonry actually, somewhere around May or June of 1717, was recognized at the beginning of Freemasonry. This ship wrecked in April of 1717. So there's not an earlier reliably dated Freemason symbol. And we found several of them. You can see Jacob's ladder, another Masonic symbol. And this particular piece, which happens to be my favorite in the whole collection, it's a blazing star leading the way, and a waning and a waxing moon, and a heart pierced by 2 arrows, a symbol of lost love. And it's a wax seal, something a pirate would stamp a letter to his girlfriend or wife with. And again, concretions. This is a massive concretion weighing a couple thousand pounds, and it's inundated with artifacts. You can see where there's a pistol, and these things haven't been taken apart. All of these artifacts have not seen the light of day. I mean, I'll be gone for 50 years when they get through with this. There's thousands of artifacts that have not been, you know, deconcreted. And again, over 50 ships were robbed from the Whydah. And to date, of the 60 cannons that we have, we don't have one gun carriage. I think we only have 50 cannonballs. We don't have anything from the stern section of the ship. And we think we know where it is now, you know, what we're looking for. You can see very clearly here there's a gun, a pistol. We have several of these pistols. You can see a set of cufflinks, and again, the pistol came out of a concretion, so it's all covered in this concrete-like material, and that ribbon was wrapped around the handle, meaning that a pirate could wear several of them around his neck and get more than one shot. This is my son, Brandon, who's been diving with me since he was a kid. He's 34 now. Back in these days, the conservator would let him work alongside her at one of the tables, and he found this little coin in a piece of a concretion. And he just told me this a couple of years ago. He said, "Dad, I didn't tell you this, but you know, I found this face on the edge of a concretion, and I didn't tell anybody because I knew they would take it away from me." But that's Louis XIV, and that's on the butt of this pistol. This particular piece was the cook stove that they used to cook on board the ship. We actually found 2 of them now. One would have been for slaves, the other would have been for the crew. This is a heavily concreted cannon, and we'll probably keep it like this. There's actually a gun door. That's actually the door from the ship, the gun door, and that's actually a small gun, probably a rail gun that's concreted to the cannon. But we were able to get down deep, and Brandon said, "Dad, I can hear something down there. You know, don't move." It's like, he knows how impatient I am. "Don't move, stay there." So we dug and we dug and we dug and we dug. Get down 30 feet under the sand. Everything else we found, we were always finding at 10 to 20 feet. But this is a stack of 7 cannon, all frozen together, along with ebony wood and artifacts and 2 big rolls of lead that are 6 feet long, that weigh thousands of pounds. So it weighs about 14,000 pounds. So after all of those years, probably like from 1985, we just found this whole layer of material that's deeper than we ever thought, along with the top of a treasure chest. And this is what the cannon pile looked like. So rather than breaking it apart, we were able to bring it up in one piece. Again, now we're in this area. We came back after all these years and gone deeper. And this is what we find. Find concreted to this anchor, which came out of the same pit, the top of a treasure chest. That's an artifact sticking out from a concretion, and it says Whydah Galley. And that's a nameplate that was on the top of that chest. My conservator, who's very nervous, he's got a $300 camera, he's in the lab by himself, his hand is shaking, and he's carefully dusting away this dust from the edge of the concretion as he takes it out from the concretion. And he sees the number 1, he sees the number 7, he sees the number 1. So it's going to be 1716, just like the bell. No, 1713. What the hell does that mean? 1713, Whydah Galley. His hands shaking like hell now as he's doing and he runs into the other room to see Ken, who of course knows everything. And Ken says, Ken, there's a 1713 on the nameplate. Well, what could that mean? And Ken goes, oh yes, well there were 2 Whyddahs. This had to have belonged to Captain Prince on his Whydah that he had before this Whydah. This Whydah was built in 1716. This was 1713. So this must have been one of Captain Prince's chests that he kept his treasure in. Because all around that treasure chest, there were coins, gold dust, and right where we discovered all of those cannon. Now, I have to say that this all sort of came to reality to me a few years ago as I'm driving down Wisconsin Avenue in Chicago, and from 2 miles away, there's our logo on the Field Museum. I mean, what the hell did we do right? You know, but there it is. And we're just so absolutely pleased to be involved with Geographic and so greatly honored that our discoveries are being shown here, and we really appreciate you coming, and again, it's a great honor. Thank you very much.